13 reasons to not watch football and 13 things to do otherwise. The prayer that we have for this analysis: Lord, lead me in thy truth and teach me, for thou art the God of my salvation. On thee do I wait all the day. The fifth reason to not watch football: greed. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10, for the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. In Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 12, in thee have they taken gifts to shed blood. Thou hast taken usury and increase, and thou hast greedily gained of thy neighbors by extortion, and hast forgotten me, saith the Lord God. And them that devise iniquity covet fields, and take them by violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. Micah chapter 2, verse 2. The fact that will probably be the most amazing when it comes to the financial structure of the National Football League is the fact that it is actually legally considered a tax-exempt charity. What this means is that as a charity, it does not have to pay taxes to the federal government. So this shields it from paying about $35 million per year in taxes. Now, this exemption was originally intended for boards of business and trade, but this changed in the 60s due to some clever lobbying to include the NFL under the 501c3 statutes. So in addition to being a charity legally, many teams are also given a waiver to pay property taxes. And we'll find out more about that in a moment. So what is it that makes the NFL so attractive to advertisers and makes it so profitable? Well, advertising or promotion is really, that's the bread and butter of the league. That's how it really makes its money. But what makes it so attractive as a medium for advertisers is that the broadcast is live. It's real time. So the fact that something is broadcast in real time, as opposed to, say, you know how at the end of a television show, they'll come on to say, this show was filmed in front of a live studio audience. That's been canned. It's been taped. And so because of that, people tend to flip more. They tend to divert their attention. But because it's live and it's happening right now, this minimizes the chance that viewers will skip a commercial time. They won't go away. So that commercial has a greater likelihood of actually reaching a viewer. So this makes it very attractive to advertisers, which in turn makes the league a very profitable platform. So profitable that nearly $10 billion per year is the average revenue for the league right now. And in fact, the league is aiming to clear $25 billion per year by 2027. And so the NFL has the unique opportunity of really sharing so much of their profits. In fact, 70 to 75% of its $10 billion a year income, including the television, broadcast, internet rights, and licensing, all of that is shared amongst the teams. Now, ticket sales are split 66% for the home team of that ticket, and then the other 34% is shared equally among all the other franchises. So only luxury boxes, local advertising, and official pro shop sales, those are the only things that are kept at or by the team. They are not shared. So this is one reason why you see so many teams building bigger stadiums with more luxury boxes, because that's profit or revenue they don't have to share with the other teams. And so no other league, whether it's baseball, whether it's basketball, or others, shares as much of its income within its league as the National Football League. When you take a closer look and see who and how the broadcasting rights are paid for and how much they're paying for them, you essentially have a core of networks: NBC, CBS, ESPN, and Fox. They pay for the broadcasting rights to play or to broadcast NFL games. So in 2013, the total rights paid was about $3 billion. And of these networks, and DirecTV alone paid an additional $1 billion on its own. Now that was in 2013, but then you see an exponential jump, a doubling in the next year. In 2014, $6 billion paid that year to broadcast the games. Now, ESPN paid about $1.9 billion, basically $2 billion for just 17 NFL games. Well, that breaks down to about $112 million per game. Now, if you compare that to what they paid for baseball, you want to talk about value? In baseball, they paid about $700 million for 90 MLB games. And that broke down to $8 million per game. So just compare, contrast. If you ever want to argue what is America's number one sport, there's really no comparison when it comes to economics. The NFL at a cost of $112 million per game, whereas baseball at a cost of $8 million per game. And that's for 90 games. But for just 17 games, $2 billion is what ESPN paid. Now, NBC that year paid over $900 million on its own. So basically, another billion. So let's be clear. This is not a critique of profitability or revenue. That's one of the benefits of living in a capitalistic society. You can make as much money as you can legally earn. But the problem is when does revenue or when does growing become greed? When does making money turn to something profitable, to something that, I don't know, to use a big vocab word, that might be a little bit pernicious? Well, when you look at the teams, there are 32 of them. 12 of the 32 teams make a profit on stadium subsidies alone, when you include all of the ongoing costs. Now, how is that possible? Well, stadiums are usually funded by tax-exempt municipal bonds. And basically, that's a way for the city to take out a loan to pay for the stadium. Now, that loan will be paid by new or existing tax revenue, usually reserved for special projects that are for the public good, things that everyone uses like roads or schools or things of that nature. But it's unique in that when it comes to stadiums, they somehow become considered something for the public good. And the teams usually take out the loans because they can't afford to build the stadiums themselves. So what they basically do is they threaten to leave the city if the city or the taxpayers don't agree to pay for the stadium for them to play in. So 70% of stadium construction costs are covered usually by the taxpayer. So the fan is paying not only for the team to play, but they're paying for the stadium that the team is playing in. That's getting money from one well twice, and that well happens to be you and me. And oh yeah, because it's a bond and it's covered by the city, it doesn't matter if you come to the games or not, whether you're a diehard fan or not. If you live there and if you pay taxes there, you're paying for that team stadium. Now, the idea behind that, that's usually pitched from the teams or the league, is that, well, new stadiums are going to create community income. But the fact of the matter is, this is a myth. In fact, most people who usually visit businesses or places downtown avoid that area of town on game day because they don't want to be involved with the traffic. They're not going to the game. And so new patrons travel to spend at the stadium and not at the surroundings. In other words, they're going to the game. And most of the money that they're going to spend is spent in that arena or in that stadium, not in a restaurant or not in a store outside. They come to the game with the jersey. They're not coming to go buy a jersey out front. They come to the game ready to eat in their seat, not to go watch and then eat 3 hours later, or go eat and then watch for 3 hours after. So when you look at it, in fact, the Economic Journal Watch in September 2008 consistently found no substantial evidence of increased jobs, incomes, or tax revenues, because again, the team is not paying tax. So how then is there going to be an increase in revenue? Well, it's going to be increased by people going to the stadium, and they'll spend more money, therefore more taxable revenue. But again, they're going to spend that money in the stadium, not outside of the stadium. In fact, one economist suggests that when it comes to spending $1 billion for a stadium, you'd be better off flying $1 billion in a plane and dumping it over the entire populace. Just dump it over the city. More people would benefit and there'd be more of a tangible boost in the spending and in the economy than it would to get a stadium with the idea that because of it, it's going to have increased revenue. It's been proven and it's obvious. I've lived in cities all over the country, and from coast to coast, the income is normally translated or concentrated in the stadium or within the team. Rarely does it affect the community. And there have been places where they tried to gentrify and try to bring up economically that area, and the only people that benefited directly were normally the teams. It wasn't folks who lived around. Their property values didn't change. In fact, sometimes they went down because people don't want the headache of dealing with all that increased congestion. So it's easy to just write this off as being biased or just hating on money or hating on income. But that's not the case. It's not a matter of just being critical of making money, but it's when money is made and other priorities are left behind, or where people are forced to sacrifice for gains while they're suffering from substantive real needs. That's the original intent and purpose of an elected official. For example, Cincinnati, Ohio, the Cincinnati stadiums basically buried the county government in debt. And I lived not far from Cincinnati for several years when we lived in central Kentucky. It says that the county will spend more than $50 million in stadium debt service and other costs in 2014. And this is back in 2013. So this is how much money they're going to have to pay out to cover these debts. So now the stadiums were built for the Cincinnati Bengals, the football team, and the Cincinnati Reds, that's the baseball team. So since building the stadiums that were supposed to boost income, and again and not just one, but two stadiums, literally side by side on the river. If there was any a place where you could see a boost, you would see some type of derivative from this income. It would be a place where there's a football stadium and then there's a baseball with over 90 games or however many games played in the season. Well, what actually happened is that since building the stadiums, they had to sell one of the hospitals. Jobs were actually reduced or cut, 1,700 of them. And they had to delay payments to fund the local schools. So now not only are goods or services of the city being compromised, but the teams literally get to call their own shots because they know they have such a bargaining power over local governments. In fact, there's a clause in the contract that it stipulates that if 14 other NFL stadiums have something built in the future, these specific teams, if they have something built that they don't have in those stadiums, the city of Cincinnati must by law pay for it and provide it to the Bengals. So now that sounds crazy. Well, how would they get these kind of clauses put in? Well, one of the things that is normally done in the bargaining table is that the owners will put in a clause that's so crazy, that's so far out, that they'll put in some that are just ridiculous, but then they'll put in some other ones, like the clause we just mentioned, that don't seem as egregious. So when you go to the bargaining table, you've got this list of 20 things. 15 of them are just crazy and ridiculous, where 5 are crazy, but they're not as crazy. So by looking at that, the person will say, well, no, we can't do these other 12 or 15 things, but we'll go ahead and do this. Not realizing that it may not be ridiculously crazy, but it is crazy. In Minnesota, for the Minnesota Vikings, the Minnesota legislature gave $506 million to the Vikings to pay for nearly half of the cost of their new stadium. Sounds great. But the problem is, how can you give someone $506 million when you can't pay your own bills yourself? They did this even though the legislature faced a $1.1 billion deficit. They were already in the hole $1 billion, $1 billion, $100 million, and then to turn around and say, we're going to give out, we're going to just pay for another $506 million of money that we don't have. Then, when the legislature made that decision, somebody's going to benefit. And it was the owner of the Vikings, Ziggy Wilf. He had a net worth in 2011 of about $322 million. When the stadium was built, and again, when half of it was paid for by the state, $500 million, that immediately increased the value of the franchise another $200 million. So here we see why there's such a motivation to build a new stadium, because The lust for the team is so strong. The desire to have a team is so strong that you're able to leverage their dependency and be as greedy as you want to be. To have someone spend money that they don't have, by then saying that we're doing this for the people whose money that we're spending that they don't have. This is greed. So taxpayers build the stadium. And again, you would say, well, it's a good deal because at least we get to keep some of the revenue. No, the teams keep the revenue. The teams keep the money that they're borrowing from you to pay for what they can't afford. They keep that money. In fact, there was a powerful interview given where the team representative for the Miami Marlins, president of the Marlins, where it talks about taxpayers building the stadium while the team's keeping all the revenue. Here is what teams keep when a new stadium or when a stadium is built or when it's being run. They get and keep the income from the naming rights. That's to name the stadium, whatever company you want it. They keep the money from that sale of those rights. They keep the money from concessions. All those hot dogs, all that popcorn, all that liquor, all that beer, they keep that money. The luxury seats, they keep that money as a team. And remember, that stays with that local team. That's not something that's shared, where we previously talked about shared revenue. And even if someone wants to come and do a concert, you got a big name, group or singer or whatever, and they come and they play the stadium, the city doesn't get any of that money. The teams keep all of that money as the arena or as the stadium is being used throughout the year or in the off season. Because if you get a team to stay or get a team to build a new stadium, usually because of warped public perception, people will consider that politician a success because they're keeping the team at home. They're keeping the squad in the house. And so in doing that, it's one of the easier ways to guarantee your reelection or to advance your political cause, whether it's to go to another office or move, quote, higher up. So it gets caught up with all of this leverage that the team has, and the city has very little to do what is right and take care of its people and give the people what they need, not just what they want. Public-private partnerships for major league sports facilities with over the past 20 years, there's been a name replacement rate of over 90%. Basically, that's why you keep seeing your stadium, you see that name being changed every so many years, because that's easy money that just costs the cost of a sign, and that's money that the team gets to keep and the city does not. The interesting dynamic and why these things are the way they are, and while they're probably not going to change financially unless we change what we watch or what we do, because if you look at the average rate or the average TV audience during the Super Bowl broadcast from 1990 to 2015, you'll notice that in most cases, with the exception of a few years, it's been an increase. So in 1990, only 74 million people watched the Super Bowl. Today, at around 2015, it's nearly at 115 million. And it's probably exceeded that by now, with an average of about 120 million people watching a single game. That's why those commercials have such value, because there's so many people watching at one time. In fact, 108 million Americans watched the Super Bowl in 2013. And so now that's why the game is broadcast amongst the big networks, NBC, CBS, and Fox. And because of this, with so many eyes on the screen, a 30-second Super Bowl ad runs now at about $5 million, even though we see it from $4 to $5 million. So if you compare that to how much it used to cost, it was $40,000 in 1967. This is the growth, the exponential growth that the league has been given by our viewership. And so a suite to watch the Super Bowl at MetLife Stadium when it was played in New York, that was an even $1 million. A room to watch a football game, not play, a room to watch a game, and a ticket to watch that game, $2,500. So because of that, say for example in 2013, CBS earned about $250 million in Super Bowl ad revenue. So you see, it benefits, or it rationalizes the cost of broadcasting that game because of the earnings that you are set to make because of the power that it has over public mind. So to understand that in and of itself, the idea of profiting or revenue is not bad, but to do so at the detriment of another, to do so knowing that there are other priorities and responsibilities, to do so just like we would frown on someone who would spend their money on a pizza when they know they can't pay their rent, or someone who spends their money on a video game knowing that their child does not have a place to lay their head. As much as we would frown on that individual, why do we not have that same kind of criticism for a city or for governments that would spend money at the state level, at the city level, local level, that they don't have to keep a team that most people are not going to watch? Friends, this is where greed and where coveting, wanting something we shouldn't have, instead of focusing and thanking God for giving us what we need. This is why the spirit of covetousness is dangerous, because we all suffer. We all lose something. In Psalm 119:36, the conclusion of the matter is this: we're invited to incline my heart unto thy testimonies, and not to covetousness. Contentment is probably one of the most precious gifts that we can have, and that's not settling. Contentment just means I'm grateful for what I do have. Therefore, I will share what I have. I will go for more, not for me, but that I might be then able to give and do more with what I have. But this is totally different than what we see as a league. And this is yet another reason for us to value where we put our eyes, and to realize that what we watch and how we spend our time, while some are willing to pay billions for it, in the long run, your time and what you view is really worth so much more.